Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce you, my good friend, Aaron Morse. Aaron Morse is one of my oldest and belovedest friends. We've been since at least middle school. We worked together at Boy Scout summer camp, and now what we do is we're at distance, long distance friends. We like to exchange ideas. Sometimes we debate ideas too, but I can't really think of anybody that I agree with more than Aaron. Yet we still find room for disagreements. Yeah, is that a fair assessment? Would you say, Aaron?
Yeah, the thing between us, Alex, is that you're a conservative and I'm a libertarian, and we fight on literally the things that we don't have in common from that.
I mean, if you look at core principles, theologically, for example, we're so close together. It's not even.
This is true.
We're so
This
close.
is
People
fairly accurate.
question, how what a relationship is. We're so close.
I remember that. That was a fun time.
We were just talking about right before we started this podcast on the general thoughts on what exactly makes for the best politician, which is a really weird kind of way to talk about politics or the political sphere. For those of you who do not know, Aaron right now is in Scotland studying history, European history, right?
I'm studying history and politics right now. I'm taking a class on constitutional law in the United Kingdom, which is a little bit of an oxymoron. But yeah, I'm a historian at heart. That's definitely true.
So let's roll right into it. What exactly makes you a libertarian, a neck-bearded libertarian, I might add?
Hey, I keep it off of my neck, good sir. Uh, I mean, belief in individual liberty and free market principles is kind of like, that's just the basics. But
that sounds just like any other conservative. What makes you a libertarian?
Ironically, the thing with libertarians is that you get a lot of no true Scotsman fallacies.
Says the guy in Scotland right now.
Hey, I said ironically. Anyway. So, you get a lot of people who say, oh, minimal state involvement. Then you get the people who say no state involvement. I generally believe in the need for a state, but I also believe in a very limited state. Like, for example, I don't believe in, generally, I don't believe in war, especially war for economic reasons, which is what I view most of our current conflicts as. That's why I'm fine with us pulling troops out. I'd also like to see us lower the military budget by a good $200-300 billion, because I don't think they need $100 billion.
That's it.
Maybe that's all I think I could get out of them.
Well,
if we could lower the military budget enough to balance the national budget, I would be happy. I would be beyond happy.
A lot of people would be happy. Do you think that the most reasonable way of doing that is to put the pressure on NATO countries and other democratic-leaning countries to increase their military spending so as to, nationally speaking, even out the power? Do you think that's the most pragmatic solution?
I definitely think that that's something that could be done. It's not out of the question, but honestly, they're going to contribute what they're going to contribute regardless.
Right.
And the United States is going to end up contributing the majority of the budget anyway, because it's our little way of keeping Russia hemmed in. Right. And I understand that. I'm fine with that. That's probably the best use of our time and money.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly what I'm concerned about, I don't think that NATO is kind of the important issue. I think the most important issue facing us with regards to the military budget is the fact that we have so much wastage in military contracts that it's disgraceful. There are so many port projects, and we order so many tanks and airplanes that just sit on runways or in depots in Arizona rusting because no one cares to use them because they don't need them. We waste so many hundreds of billions of dollars on that I think that's probably the biggest thing we need to worry about.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but some politicians, even Bernie Sanders, will advocate for more military spending because it benefits. It's basically pork barrel stuff. It just people in that local area can build it.
A jobs program, yeah.
So
that's all it is. And that's even more true for the representatives, because if a representative ends up losing military business in their district, then they end up getting voted out the next election cycle. So You know,
So do you think that, I mean, it's not necessarily, I'm sure this would make your libertarian heart cringe, but do you think that a better solution would be to, um, in a sort of compromise, instead of spending it on military whatever, you instead spend it on something like some sort of industry, be it renewable energy or something that is generally not less scary than military stuff.
so
So
I'm generally not a huge fan of subsidies for any industry.
I told you
Uh,
this would make you cringe, but I'm saying would it be better?
I don't think that it would be any better or worse. It would just be a more wasteful government spending. So I think you might as well just cut all of that out of the budget because honestly, at this point, we really need to start trimming the fat. I think you could also get rid of like farming subsidies because here's one thing that I've noticed while I've been in Europe that I think is incredibly important that I don't think we think about. Everything in America has corn in it, literally everything. Just everything. There is corn in everything we
Pretty
eat
much.
in like every product because we have too much corn. If I was going to write a book about American history, it would be called America: An Overabundance of Corn. We have too much corn because
Wow.
we subsidize the growing of corn.
Okay. So is that sort of like cutting it at the root? If pardon the expression, if we just stop spending so much money on corn instead of either not spend it on corn at all or spend it on something else. Sorry that that
Yeah, well, that's just part of the larger problem of subsidies in general.
Okay.
But honestly, that might be one of the reasons why America has such a problem with obesity.
Right.
Like, it just generally is that our food isn't as healthy because our food contains a lot of corn.
That's
That's not
true.
the whole thing. I don't want to get misquoted as saying that I think that the only reason America has problems is because of corn. I just
That'd be a very corny answer, dare I say it. So,
oh God, Alex.
one thing I would be very interested. It's a bit more ideological, and some of the viewers may consider that. I mean, on a lot of issues, I consider myself to be libertarian, but predominantly, I think of myself as a conservative. So, what do you think is the distinction to be made between libertarian and conservative? Because for all intents and purposes, typically conservatives and libertarians are in the same boat against the regressive left right now. So, this point in American history, by and
To an
large.
extent, I think that's true. I think it's just a measure of how much you care about the budget. Because the way that I've seen most conservatives is generally it's the only thing that they're for small government wise is small government when the Democrats are in office. Uh, the reason that I decide not to associate myself with a party is because uh, I see it as a feudal system because all they're doing is reinforcing each other's power. Like the Republicans have, while they've been in office, haven't reduced the size of government at all. The tax code still is still unwieldy. It's
Mhm.
almost worse, not quite, but almost.
Mhm.
And it honestly, like if the Republicans have had all three branches of government for 2 years, we should have seen some sort of decrease in the size of government. We haven't seen any of that. I think the
Mhm.
main thing is for the conservatives and for the Republican Party, small government is kind of like the whistle they use to try and get libertarians onto their side, whereas
Mhm.
libertarians actually believe in small government
Right, right.
and implementing those principles. Whereas I don't think that Republicans and generally conservatives actually like hold to those principles. I think that they use them in order
So,
to get more
it,
votes.
at least in theory or in terms of ideology, they're pretty much the same thing. The only difference is libertarians are more likely to stick with their guns
Yeah.
versus conservatives are like, well,
Well, and
at least
they'll
it's
also
not
make,
the Democrat. It could be worse. Haven't
they
heard that
also
one before, but
make exceptions for their guy. Like when Trump declared the national emergency, that was a that was a wrong move. Honestly, that was a pretty blatant power grab on the executive branch's part, and I'm very glad that certain Republicans moved over and voted against that.
Ron
Uh,
Paul.
and Paul, thank you very much. And yes, that's who I was referring to. Uh, that's a good thing, because that means that when the Democrats get in power, they're not going to say, look at the state of healthcare and then declare a national emergency and then through executive power, like reform our healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's kind of what we're looking at, is if you let your guy get away with it, you're going to let the Democrat get away with it next time. And I don't think that a lot of Republicans, especially the ones in office, I don't think they really consider that. And that's something that I think is going to bite them in their behinds coming next election cycle.
Well, here's a sort of a tactical question for you. Is it better to I mean, the case of the national emergency is perfect. Is it better to let? I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong, but you approve of the wall. You know, maybe not how we get the wall, but you approve of there being a barrier on the U.S.'s southern border. Is that right?
I actually don't know if a barrier is necessary. I kind of just want to reform the immigration system as a whole.
Sure. Okay, but
do I think it needs to be patrolled? Yes. Do I think that like borders are an important part of national sovereignty? Yes. Do I think that we need to approve $5 billion for a wall or $10 billion for a wall? Honestly, that's how much Washington spends in a day. I don't get why they're really worried about it. I think we should be more worried about the fact that the wall costs what Washington only spends in a day. I think that's what we should be worried about a little more.
No,
as far as
totally
that
get
goes,
that.
I don't think that it warrants a national emergency. And honestly, I think that there are many better ways of dealing with that problem.
The reason why I bring up the wall is because, or the emergency spent or the national security whatever for the wall, is because people are basically saying, well, this is we have to go forward with this because it's an emergency, it's an epidemic, blah blah blah, and the Ron Pauls and the not necessarily I won't say the entire all the dissenting GOP people had pure intentions. I mean, Mitt Romney, I think he's just trying to stick it to Trump, which makes sense. But I don't know the guy personally. But the point I'm trying to get at is, let's just say that building a wall is something good, something that benefits the country, but it pushes limits on it pushes around the Constitution a little bit. It makes it more jelly-like. Do you believe that fixing a problem is, let's say it's a very drastic problem, is it worth violating the Constitution? I'm not necessarily saying the wall is the perfect example of that, but in theory.
I think that the sanctity of the Constitution is far more important. The structure and the intent of the Constitution is far more important to maintain than a temporary crisis that isn't really even a crisis. I think that when you get to the point,
would there be a crisis that would be worth violating theoretically, at least? Worth violating?
Theoretically, I want to say no, but I know that that's a bit disingenuous because there are times where looser constraints are necessary, and I understand that. However, every time one of those situations arises, the executive just takes more power from the legislative branch. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that needs to be stopped. Although, if we're being honest with ourselves, there's one branch that has more power than the other two branches, and that's the judicial. So,
right.
But if we're talking about just between the executive and the legislative, every time there's a situation like that, the executive takes more power from the legislative branch to the point where Congress doesn't do anything, can't do anything, and hasn't done anything because they've given up the ability to do things or the political need to do things because they've sloughed all of that off onto the presidents.
Right.
And that's not a good way to do things, I don't think.
Well, a lot of people don't seem to realize. It really shocks me how few people realize this. Congress is supposed to be slow and ineffective. It's literally.
I 100% agree.
And so when I hear people go, "Oh, Congress, it's a waste of time. They don't get anything done," I'm like, "Yeah, they literally are designed to not get anything done." Why do you think that is? That so many people never understand that?
It's because we stopped teaching civics in our high schools. We give them one class and we say, here, now you know about the government, and no one pays attention in government unless you're you or me.
Or
argue with the teacher. where we argue with the teacher about politics for like 40 minutes, and that's the entire class stops. Right?
Ah, good times, good times. Oh, that was.
I've
Oh,
done that. You've done that. That's just who we are as people. But
it
most
really is.
people do
Yeah.
not care.
And everyone else just sits back and eats popcorn while we argue with the professor. Exactly right.
No,
So,
more than likely they're on Instagram. That's fine. I don't care.
yeah, but
However, but people don't take the time to understand how the government's supposed to work. And I think that that's a real detriment. I think that, as with everything, the education system also needs to be overhauled. But
well,
you know,
what
might
is
be
your
a byproduct of
recommendation to fix that problem? I mean, as a libertarian, is there really any way of fixing the educational system without more government, quote unquote?
charter schools.
Okay, charter
They,
schools.
they've been shown, especially in New Orleans,
Mhm.
to be more effective than regular public schools. Just some background: New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, Milton Friedman in the Chicago School of Economics kind of got to work.
Saint Friedman.
Hey, listen to what I'm saying.
All right.
Anyways,
all right.
they got to work in New Orleans.
Okay.
Right after Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans had about 104 public schools. After Hurricane Katrina, they had 4 public schools, and then the rest became charter schools. Their graduation rate went from somewhere around 40% to somewhere up near 75, 76%
Oh, wow.
in 4 or 5 years,
Wow.
which is incredibly high. The rate
Wow.
of people moving on to secondary institutions like colleges and trade schools went from somewhere around 20%. And I'm not certain on the figures because it's been a while since I've looked this up. But it went from around 20% to around 40%. And success was generally, more on the table than it was before. Charter schools tended to work. And that's what I've been seeing is that a charter school system, because they have to, they have to have a good reputation. They have to work for the tax dollars that they get because, you have to have students, and the students have individual tax dollars assigned to them. Right. They have to.
They're in the free market now.
Yeah. Well, it's a market system, and market systems generally give better outcomes. That's
Right.
That's what I believe, and that's what I think history shows. Not to pull the historical trump card, but
Well, I mean, I would expect as much from you. In the time we have left, there's been a noticeable split among conservatives. Ben Shapiro is kind of becoming more and more. I mean, you can debate whether or not he's a true libertarian because you'll do that with every single libertarian.
the No True Scotsman is very strong in the libertarian community. I
Right,
try
right.
not to do that. I try to look at it objectively, but continue.
Right. So he tends to represent libertarians, and Tucker Carlson, who speaks in favor of protective measures like tariffs and subsidies for certain industries. And see, Tucker Carlson, he strikes a chord with a lot of conservatives because conservatives try to conserve, and at the same time, they're trying to conserve individuals. But it is a very real present thing for people who have had their whole life training, all their experience in particular manufacturing jobs. And once they become obsolete and they move off to China or whatever, they feel very, very desperate. And so Tucker Carlson's conservatism of protectionism is very, very sympathetic to them. Whereas Ben Shapiro, he tends to be much more purist, total free market, no restrictions. What are your thoughts on that sort of comparison?
I think that's probably fairly valid. That Shapiro is a little more purely libertarian in that respect, and I tend to agree with that view. That if a manufacturing job is better off being done somewhere else, that's fine. America has not really any huge problem with unemployment right now. The economy is doing quite great,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to shy away from admitting that it is doing quite well. So honestly, I sympathize with the way that industrial workers feel. I mean, I worked the trades over the summer in order to pay for school. Like, I totally get like the ideas behind that, but I think you can find similar things happening during the Industrial Revolution and especially post-industrial revolution. where people are losing their traditional manufacturing jobs to these big factories that are now losing their jobs to being overseas.
Or automation or whatever.
Yeah, you run the risk of becoming Luddites, and I think that's something that we need to avoid, and we did in the past because technology is going to keep improving. But as technology improves, historically there hasn't been a major loss of jobs. Jobs continue to exist because there continue to be new jobs. I mean, in the 1980s, no one knew that the internet was going to be like a thing, and now it's the basis of a lot of jobs. I think that we're going to be fine. I don't think we're going to need to create some sort of socialist paradise in order to
Right.
take care of everyone.
I've actually heard some people who describe themselves as classically liberal say that they actually feel as though, I don't know about think, but they feel as though a basic guaranteed income will be necessary because of the automation of jobs. Of course, I mean, I'd be surprised if you agreed with them.
I don't. I get the argument. I understand the argument, but they're playing wealth as a zero-sum game, where, you know, if one person is wealthy, then obviously they've made someone else poorer. You know, if automation is taking these jobs, that means there's not going to be any jobs left. But new jobs get created all of the time, and new fields end up being able to be gone into. Like, I think that they're overreacting.
Sure.
This is exactly the kind of thing that Marx was predicting would happen with capitalism, right? He thought that industrialism would make it so that no one had to work and, you know, everyone would be on a basic income. I think that their ideas are remarkably similar. I'm not calling them Marxist, but I think their ideas are along the same lines, that they're not thinking about the fact that new jobs are going to be created that need to be done.
I love how you just walk the line of, you know, not trying to name call. I can feel the temptation in all that.
I don't believe in ad hominem attacks. I think that our country has had a little too much of that. I'm very worried about the state of the country right now, because honestly, I worry more and more that we're losing common grounds
of values,
fellow Americans. Not even values, just like the common ground of we expect that the other side also wants the best for the country, right? It's gone into, you know, these people are terrible because they believe certain things, and these people are terrible because they believe certain things, and there's no common ground to be had anymore. That's worrisome to me, because then you can end up getting split along partisan or ideological lines, and that's when civil wars happen. And I'm a little worried about that in the United States currently.
So on that happy diddly note, I think we'll put a pause on this podcast. Thank you so much, Aaron. This was a great talk on economics, and thank you so much for joining my channel. Please subscribe, guys, and thank you so much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, Alex.